This week's halacha share is entitled Visiting the Graves of Tzaddikim. Why are we discussing it this week? Because next week is Erev Rosh Hashanah, and there is a minhag to go to the Beis HaKvaros on Erev Rosh Hashanah. If you take a look at the handout, and if you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. The halacha says in Hilchos Rosh Hashanah Siman Tov Kuf Pei Aleph Sif Dalet, says the Ramah, Nagin Litval Erev Rosh Hashanah, there is a minute to go to the mikveh in Erev Rosh Hashanah. V'yesh mekaymes nagin leilech al hakvaros u'laharbes sham betchinos. There is a minhag to go to the Beis HaKvaros on Erev Rosh Hashanah and to daven. And this indeed is an ancient custom that throughout our history we have done that. We have found recourse and solace in going to the graves of Tzaddikim. For example, Yosef cried at his mother's grave before going to Mitzrayim. That's brought in the Sefer HaYosha. The Klal Yisrael wept at Kever Rachel before going into Golus. Rashi brings that in Pashas Vayechi at the end. Kolev davened at Ma'aras HaMachpelah before confronting the Meraglim, the spies. A Gemara in Sotah Lamed Dalet. So that this is an ancient custom. The halacha brings this in other instances, going to the Beis HaKvaros. For example, in Hilchos Tanis, when there is drought and difficulties in Klal Yisrael, the Mechaber writes, Shevet ha'aniyos ha'elu, there are 7 types of fasts. Ach Hashem ispalalim yotzim b'chol ha'am lebeis hakvaros. All the people go out to the cemetery, u'boichim u'mischannim shom, and they cry and they supplicate, they daven over there. The Ramah says, Imein kivrei Yisrael halchim al kivrei kutim, that if there isn't a Jewish cemetery, then you go to a non-Jewish one. We'll come back to that in a minute, exactly what that's about. The Shulchan Aruch says also in Hilchos Tisha B'Av, there is a minhag to go to the Beis HaKvaros on Tisha B'Av itself. The Ramah says, "V'holchim al HaKvaros miyad k'sheholchim bebeis HaKnesses." That you spent the morning in shul saying kinnos. There is a minhag. The Ramah brings. He says it's cited in the Beis Yosef in the name of Tosfos that you go to the Beis HaKvaros then as well. So this is a well-trodden path that the Klal Yisrael do, that we go and daven at Kivrei Tzaddikim. Now, what is the reason? What is the makar, or the rationale, better, for the custom of visiting graves? What is that about? So, people go for different reasons. Of course, one should know of it, but one goes to the graves of parents or other relatives on their yard sites or on special occasions. And the main purpose of that is an Ilui Neshama, to go on the yard site itself. But apart from that, the Gemara in Tanis brings 2 other reasons why one would go to a Beis HaKvaros. If you take a look at paragraph 4, the Gemara in Tanis, Daf Tes Zayin Amud Aleph, the Gemara asks this question: Lama yotzin leBeis HaKvaros? Why do people go? Why do we go out to a Beis HaKvaros? Says the Gemara 2 reasons. Pligi bar Rabbi Levi bar Chama v'Rebbi Chanina. 2 of our Amoraim argue about it. Chadom, one says, Harianu chashuvin lefanecha k'meisim. We go sort of as a reminder to express recognition of our own mortality, that we're like Mesim, and therefore that will help us do tshuva. So that the dead can pray for mercy on our behalf. Says the Gemara, my benayu, what was the difference? What is the practical nafkamina between these 2 reasons? The nafkamina is, says the Gemara, benayu kivrei nachrim. Do you go to the kever of a non-Jewish person if there are no Kivrei Yisrael? So if the reason is to remind us of our own mortality, that we should be encouraged, aroused to do tshuva, then going to the Beis HaKvaros itself is a very sombering thing to do, and therefore will remind us of our own mortality, whether it's Kivrei Mesim or Kivrei Akum. But if the reason is to ask the dead to pray for mercy on our behalf, that would only be appropriate for Kivrei Yisrael. The Mishnah Berurah does add that if one does go to Kivrei Mesim, as the Ramah says there, that if in Hilchos Tanis, that in Kivrei Yisrael, Holchim al Kivrei Kutim, the Mishnah Berurah points out, Ulevat kol zeh, b'mkoim shemamitim gilulim al Kivreim, b'vad einochen nispal Hashem. One has to be careful that there are no sort of religious symbols on the graves. That would be inappropriate to daven in that situation. Now, what I want to focus on today is really this concept of davening to the Mesim, because there are major halachic problems with davening to the Mesim. If you think about it, surely this violates the second of the Aseret Hadibros. The pasuk says, "Lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim al ponoi." You're not allowed to have any other gods. So if you're davening to anyone other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, surely that violates this second of the Aseret HaDibros, and therefore praying to the dead and asking for them to intervene on our behalf, surely that violates that problem. And second of all, there is an Issa later on in Sefer Devarim, the Doresh Shel HaMesim. So how do we deal with these issues? So in short, and again, much of what I'm going to say now is I've seen in the writings of Rabbi Daniel Neustadt. That's where I saw a lot of these Makoros. And he says the following, that there are two schools of thought when it comes to going to the Beis HaKvaros. One school of thought is that it's permitted to speak directly to the Mesim, to the dead, and ask them to daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on our behalf. In fact, similarly, many tefillas and slichas which are addressed to angels. And that's also, according to this school of thought, perfectly okay. Although, of course, angels are merely HaKadosh Baruch Hu's messengers and don't possess the ability to do anything on their own accord, still, we were allowed to daven to them, to deliver our prayers to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So too, it's permitted to address the dead directly and ask them to intercede on our behalf to the Kisei HaKavod, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly. Now, what are the Makoros for this school of thought? So there are two. First, that I've come across. So the first is a Prima Godim. This is on the first box on the second side. The Prima Godim writes in Tov Kuf Pei Aleph Sivkot and Tes Zayin. He says, he quotes the Rabbi in the Maharil, to Beis HaKvaros Mokum Kodesh V'Tohar. It's a very holy place. Yischaven she'HaKadosh Baruch Hu yitein le'rachmim b'zchus hatzaddikim, etc. And then he quotes the Siddur Ma'aneh Loshen. He says, "B'Siddur Ma'aneh Loshen yesh tfilas ma she'omrim al hakvarim mashma k'tzas shemevakshim me'eis hanefesh." You're actually davening to the mace, to the dead person himself, sheyelitz toiv ba'adenu, that he should intercede on our behalfs. And there is also a tshuva of the Maramshik. The Maramshik says in Archaim, Siman Reish Tzadi Gimel, HaTorah lo osra ele milsin eloikus l'shum nivra, afilu lemalach. The Torah prohibits us from davening to anything other than HaKadosh Baruch, to anything other than HaKadosh Baruch himself, even to a malach. V'lekach also lispal aleihem she'amlitzu toiv avureinu. She'bezen noisin lem koach v'shiraros, and it sort of empowers them somehow, sort of, again, spiritually, kabbalistically in some way. However, continues the Maramshik, but that is not true if you go to the Kvarim of Tzaddikim, that they daven on our behalves. That doesn't give them any sort of authority. Rather, you're sort of pouring out your heart to the Tzaddikim that they too should be mitzta'eh, they should feel the pain that we feel. And therefore that somehow causes a merit that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will intercede. And therefore there is no reason to prohibit us to daven directly to the Mesim and to pour our hearts out to them. That is one school of thought. The second school of thought is that others strongly disagree and maintain that it's strictly forbidden to daven to the Mesim, and this violates Doresh Shel HaMesim. Rather, we daven directly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that in the merit of the Mesim, of those buried in this Beis HaKvaros, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should have mercy on us and answer our tefillas. And that is expressed in different sources. The Ber Hetiv here in Tov Kuf Pei Aleph Sivkot and Yud Zayin says, HaMispal al Kivrit Tzaddikim al yosim agmosu neged HaMesim. Don't daven to the Mesim. Ach yivakesh me'Hashem Yisbarach sheyitin olav rachamim bizchus hatzaddikim sheichne ofer. Quoting the Maharil. The Maharil is the father of Minhag Ashkenaz, and says the Behitiv, quoting the Maharil, rather we should daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he should display mercy to us in the merit of the tzaddikim who are buried there. And indeed, the Mishnah Berurah brings that as well. If you look in the next paragraph, the last paragraph on the page, most of the classical poskim paskin in accordance with the second view that you shouldn't daven directly to the Mesim, rather you daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that is expressed by the Behetiv I just quoted, the Chai Odin, the Mateh Ephraim, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and the Mishnah Berurah. If you look at the last box, I've quoted the Mishnah Berurah here, Beis HaKvaros u'mokum menuchas hatzadikim v'atfilan iskabel sham yoseh, that it's an auspicious place to daven. Ach al yosim magmosin neged hamesim, says the Mishnah Berurah, that you shouldn't direct your tefillahs and your woes to the Mesim. Ach yivakesh ma'Hashem Yisbarach sheyitein olav rachmim b'zchus hatzadikim sheichne ofer. Rather, you daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that in the merit of those who are buried there, those tzaddikim who are buried there, that they should that should be a merit for us, that our tefillah should be answered. So there we have it. Visiting the graves of Tzaddikim. It's a very noble thing to do. It's a very important thing to do. It's a minhag brought on Erev Rosh Hashanah to go. And that is an ancient custom, like I said, lots of precedent for it in Jewish history. And it's found also in Shulchan Aruch and other occasions to go to the Beis HaKvaros to daven. The reasons for it, either one goes on a yard site of a close family member or a loved one. The Gemara in Tanya says there are two reasons why one goes. Number one is sort of to remind us of our own mortality, and therefore that arouses us to do tshuva, or to daven to the Mesim to intercede on our behalf. And the nafkamina would be kivrei nochrim. Praying to the dead themselves, lechora violates possibly various isurim, and therefore two schools of thought have emerged. One is that it's permitted to directly ask to the Mesim and ask them to intercede in Tav HaKadosh Baruch Hu on our behalf, and perhaps that is what we find in Slichas and other areas. However, although there is precedent for that in the Pri Megadim and the Maram Shik, others strongly disagree, and the consensus of classical poskim is that better one should daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the zechus of the tzaddikim that you're visiting, the graves you're visiting, that they should that zechus should help us, that our tefillah should be answered. So in Mitzvah Hashem, that we should all be zochet to exactly that. We should daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and our tefillahs Mitzvah Hashem for the whole of Klal Yisrael should be answered.